Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to talk about this paper called Masked Autoencoders That Listen. This paper is a collaboration between Facebook AI Research and CMU. Except Juncheng Li, all other authors are from Facebook and Juncheng Li is from CMU. So in this tutorial we are going to understand the idea or the introduction of the paper. Then we'll see the idea of masked encoders for audio application, and we'll see what are the data sets used for training these models, and we'll see some experiments and results. So about a year ago, Facebook AI research group published a paper called Masked Autoencoders are Scalable Vision Learners. So this was the paper which showed how we can leverage autoencoders for pre-training in the image domain. And after you pre-train the autoencoders on the images, you can fine-tune it for fine-tune those models for downstream image applications. Right? And in this paper, they use the similar idea, but instead of image, we have audio. You can think of autoencoder. So autoencoders are known for many decades now. And the idea of autoencoder is you have an encoder and you have a decoder, and whatever we feed at the input to the encoder should be able to be decoded in the decoder. And there are many varieties of autoencoders you have. There is variational autoencoder, and there is noisy Gaussian noise autoencoders, and so on. There are many varieties of autoencoders available. Now, in this paper, or the other paper which actually introduced the masked autoencoder idea, so they propose to use this idea of masking the image, or in our case, it's spectrogram at the input, and asking the decoder to generate the original input. For example, if you have an image, right? So if you have an image, so you can split that image into grids, right? Small image blocks, right? And you can, if this is an image, you can just remove or mask many of these patches. They call it patches, and only input those patches which are not masked, right? And you can mask as much as 75% of the entire image, right? So, and even with that, if you force this model to generate this original image, which is actually not masked, then the encoder will run very good feature representations for images. And those representations, you can use it for downstream image applications, or I mean downstream applications. Image applications are such as classifying the images, or image tagging, and so on. So the similar idea is also used here, except there are few tricks added to make it work, right? So you can replace this image. In the case of audio, you can replace this image with a spectrogram. If you see, spectrogram is also an image, right? You can think of it as a 3D image. If you consider the height or the frequency dimension, not really the frequency, the amplitude dimension also is the third dimension, right? So so this is also an image, right? And in this image, you have frequency axis, sorry, time axis here, and the frequency axis here, right? And if you think of this as an image, then obviously you should be able to use this similar algorithm in the audio case as well, right? So, so we'll understand this audio masked encoder, or just the masked encoder, in detail in the coming slides. But this is the whole idea. So you pre-train the autoencoder with masking technique, so that the encoder learns some useful feature representations which you can fine-tune for downstream speech applications. And the crazy thing is, there's something which I will show you at the end of this tutorial, which is in the result section. You can not only use the audio pre-trained encoder, even if you use image encoders and fine-tune those encoders with small amount of labeled audio data, you will be able to get really good performance or really good accuracies for some of the audio applications. So think about this. You have encoder trained on images, but you can still fine tune it for audio applications, right? Sounds a little crazy because we think that whatever model you train should be, I mean, pre-trained model you train should be used to do the fine tuning. But since image, I mean, the spectrograms are images, and these encoders are learned to capture hierarchical representations from lower level to high level, and these patterns or these lower level features, high level feature mappings will also help you to do some audio classification tasks as well. So we'll see those in the results coming slide. And they also use something called local window attention to improve the performance, to get a better performance instead of just using the global attention, which is just a transformer, right? And they show that for many speech and audio classification tasks, this idea of audio master encoder outperforms some of the previously proposed speech or self-supervised pre-training algorithms. So, what is audio master encoder? So, I'll explain this audio master encoder in very simple terms. As a matter of fact, if you read the paper which I mentioned, the image paper called Masked Autoencoders or Scalable Vision Learners, you will pretty much understand this paper very easily because the idea is exactly the same, right? So you have an input here. So the input is again is an image, right? You can think of this as an image, and you have the spectrogram here. So this is our spectrogram, right? And you can divide this spectrogram into grids, right? Or they also call it patches, and you can mask out most of this spectrogram patches. So you can mask out as much as 80% of this whole spectrogram, right? So as you can see, lots of patches are masked out, means the black means masked, and whatever is remained, you can feed them as input to the encoder. And the encoder is again a transformer model. It also uses positional encoding, right? And it's a standard transformer. People call it as vision transformer. So there is an algorithm called VIT, which was actually something like BERT proposed for image application. And what they do is they take these patches, they don't feed it as it is to the encoder, they just linearize it. So basically, they just convert this 2D image into a single vector, and they use a linear layer uh, to project this long vector into a particular dimension, and then everything becomes a vector, right? This is a vector, this is a vector, this is a vector, and now you can use these vectors you can use these vectors and feed them to a transformer, and a transformer, as you know, takes sequence of vectors and then runs self attentions on this vector and generates another sequence of vectors and so on. You can have as many as 20 or 30 layers of transformers, right? Or transformer layers. And then at the end, you have to generate an output. So that is the output from the transformer, right? And these vectors are the outputs of the encoder. Now, what do we do? In case of, for example, VIT or even in any other transformer-based self-supervised trainings, what you do is you just compute some sort of loss, right? So if it is MLM loss, you compute master MLM loss. If it is something like contrastive loss, in case of wave to wave, you compute contrastive loss, and so on. But in this case, what they are going to do is they are going to do something different. So what they do is they are going to take this output from encoder, and then they are going to create a decoder. So the decoder is also a transformer network, but to the decoder, you don't not only feed the output from encoder, but you also attach or concatenate your patches which are masked out. You can ask me a question. Okay, all of these patches are masked out, means they are like blank, they are all zeros. What is the point of concatenating all zeros or ones and then adding something here? So we're not going to just give zero. So we are going to create a learnable vector for each of these patches, not for each of these patches. It is shared vector representations for all of the patches, and those will be replaced in this black boxes here, right? And the blue ones will go to their respective locations. right? And sorry, there's the one. So there is a vector, shared vector here. So like that, you're going to create sequence of vectors, which are some of them are from the output of the encoder, and some are directly taken from the input. So essentially, to the decoder, you are feeding the output of the encoders, right? So EO, for example, and you're also going to feed in the input masked vectors. So, so these two combined are going to be the input to the decoder. So the decoder length or the input, the length of the sequence you feed to the decoder will be same as the number of patches in the input, right? And obviously you have to add positional encoding here in order to make sure the sequencer, I mean the sequences or the patch locations are taken into consideration while doing all these operations, right? And the decoder job is to predict the actual patches or patches, mean the spectrogram segments, right? Now you can say, okay, this is something similar to, for example, masked language modeling, right? Because in case of masked language modeling, what you do is you take the sequence of words and you mask out some of the words, and then you feed that to the input, and you force the output to generate or predict those masked input words, right? That's what you are doing here. But before doing that, you also have an encoder which you are training. I mean, so you can think of this thing as masked language modeling, but in some high dimensional space, right? Not in the image space, but you have some high dimensional vector space, and you are doing all these operations on that space, right? At the same time, you're also a training or a back propagating to the encoder such that it learns to project to such high dimensional space, and the vectors in that space are useful for you for those vectors in that high dimensional space have really a good disentanglement which you can use to do a downstream or to build downstream speech or image. I mean, use them for speech or image applications. And even with very small amount of data, they should be able to work, right? And once you get these patches from the decoder, you just compute mean square error loss between the input, the original input, the true input, which is not masked, with the prediction, right? Mean square error, and you just propagate that loss to both the decoder and the encoder. That's it. That is the idea here, right? It's not like a very complicated network architecture or anything. It's a very simple idea. It worked for image and also works for speech, right? This is the idea borrowed from image application and being is used in the speech case here, right? And once you do the training, you can use the encoder as a pre-trained model, and for any input image, you can just get the feature representations, and you can use that for speech application, right? I mean, in our case, we can train this model on large amount of audio, and then whatever output we get, those features, you can use it for fine tuning a small linear layer or a simple LSTM layer for, let's say, speech spoken term detection, not really spoken term detection, any other audio classification task, right? So classifying audio signals, for example. So that is the whole idea here. This is exactly same as the linear, the masked autoencoders for image application. So there is one or few tricks here, the few things which are added here. So instead of just using the attentions from the transformer, which are basically the global attention layers, we also, I mean, the paper also is going to use local attention, right, which is something similar to what is proposed in swing transformers, right? And that with the global attention is the best combination. So, like I said, we have global attention, which is just the transformer self attention. And the local attention is basically the shifted window attention, which is proposed in spin transformers. And there's a hybrid model, which basically uses both the local and global attention. So the local attention is used for many layers, but the global attention is used only for the last few layers. And the loss they use is the mean square error loss. And during fine tuning, forgot to mention this, during fine tuning, we will not touch the decoder. We'll just throw away the decoder. We'll only use the encoder and only fine tune the encoder for the downstream applications. And also, there are variety of different ways you can mask your data, right? So in case of speech, there is a particular pattern, right? In spectrogram, we have two dimensions. So there is X dimension, which is the time dimension, and the Y dimension, which is the frequency dimension. Each of them have their own roles, right? Like in case of speech, so high pitch means you have higher pitch audio, which characterizes specific sounds, and the time also matters, right? So we know what dimension affects what, right? So, but in case of image, it's just 2D. I mean, it's we don't really name a particular dimension in the case of 2D image, right? But in case of speech, we do. So, unlike the image application where they randomly remove or randomly mask out the patches, in case of speech, we can actually guide, or we can actually mask a specific dimension. Like in this case, you can mask a time dimension, as you can see here, and you can also mask frequency dimension, or you can do both. You can mask time and frequency dimension both, and see what is the performance of the overall system, right? So we'll see the results for all of these variations, and that is the audio must encoder idea. So the data sets, so they're using audio set data set, which has around 2 million uh, utterances of 10 second taken from YouTube. And this is mostly used for audio classification task. And there are 527 classes, also called as audio events. And they don't have like fully annotated data. So the data set is weakly labeled, and they have balanced and unbalanced training signals, right? And they also, that's the audio set data set. And we have environmental sound classification, also known as ESC 50 dataset, which has 2005 second environmental sound recording, and there are like 50 classes in that dataset. And in case of a speech command, we have two datasets. One has 35 commands, and another has 12 commands or 10 commands. So if you include silence and unknown, it's 12. And we have Voxelab, which is mostly used for speaker verification or speaker classification tasks. It has 1,021 speakers and 150,000 utterances from all the speakers, mostly used for speaker identification tasks, like I mentioned. Now coming to the model architecture itself. So like I said, they are using the 12-layer vision transformer by default as the transformer encoder. And for the decoder, they are using 16 layers transformers with shifted local attention. Like I mentioned, the shifted local attention is what is introduced in the swim transformer. This is useful to get, this is useful for speech application or audio application, because in case of image, we are not really worried about the local or um, fine-grained details of the image. For example, you can see an image and understand, okay, this is an image, and that makes sense because the higher level features are more important in case of image. But in case of speech, we are more focused on the lower level features, like how frequency changes between few frames, right? So those are all matters for the downstream applications. So that's why having a local attention is going to be important, instead of just having a global attention, which captures only the global information, and local attention captures the local information, which is important for speech. So for that, we are using shifted local attention here. And I mean, they have done a lot of experiments on these. You can see the results. And like I mentioned, data set for pre-training, these details you can find in the paper. But and during fine-tuning phase, like I mentioned, they are going to remove the decoder. Now, just to understand the ratio of masking, how much ratio affects the training and fine tuning, like and so on. So as you can see here, the y-axis is basically your accuracy, precision. You can see MAP, and the x-axis is the percentage of masking. As you can see, even with 80% of masking, you can get the best performance, right? And something similar is also shown in the case of the image case. They say 75, even if you do 75% of masking, you'll still be able to do better. I mean, you'll still be able to get a better performance. So the same thing is shown here. For pre-training, you can do unstructured masking up to 80%, and others are shown here. And in the case of fine tuning, you can do time frequency combination masking, and you can do up to something like 25% ratio, right? And that is the masking ratio versus the mean precision, the precision MAP score. And finally, the result section. Here is where they compare the previous state-of-the-art approaches, right? So as you can see here, we have no pre-training, which just uses the CNN backbone, and these are the tasks, right? So PT data, AS, audio set 2 million, ESC1, 2, and then SPC1, SPC2, speech commands, basically. So they said is speech speaker verification, and so on. And in-domain self-training means you pre-train your model with the speech data, right? That's the in-domain data. Out of domain self-supervised pre-training means you are using the pre-trained model which is trained on image data set, and you are fine-tuning that for speech tasks. This sounds a little bit weird because I mean, usually people don't go for these things because I mean, at least for sound classification, I believe it will work because image systems or image models are trained to learn hierarchical representation of the input. And I think Spectrum also has Spectrum for sound classification tasks at least have that kind of hierarchical information which you can extract using the same classifiers. But if you come to, let's say, speech recognition task, I don't think so this will work. So just to summarize, so we have in-domain self-supervised pre-training. You can they have compared with Web2Vec, Hubert, Conformer. These are the state-of-the-art models. Were the state-of-the-art models for many speech applications, and we have concurrent MAE based, which is master autoencoder based models, which some people have tried this VITV before, right? In fact, I have an implementation of this VIT model for speaker. Sorry, where is this? Yeah, speech command dataset. This number I remember because when I published that code to GitHub, I remember getting almost the same accuracy. But this was specific only for this was trained specifically for this uh, this task that paper. But this paper, as you can see, it's pre-trained generally and fine-tuned for all the other tasks here. So as you can see, this provides, I mean, this gets almost the state-of-the-art performance for almost all the downstream applications. So they also have global and local. Now, coming to out-of-domain self-supervised pre-training, which, like I said, they use just the pre-trained models trained on images and then fine-tune it for these tasks. Surprisingly, as you can see, for ESC, we get the best performance using the image model, right? And yeah, I think only for this, all others are even this one is almost close if you see actually. So anyway, and finally we'll see this image where this is just to show how the reconstructions are, right? Like for example, this is the original image. This is what you are going to, they use the input of the encoder because you have masked a lot of patches, and then this is what you get at the end after the decoder, right? Same case for multiple inputs. And that's all for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. This paper is very interesting. I mean, you can check out the paper if you just search for masked autoencoders um, that listen, I think. So that's the title of the paper. It's a almost 20-page paper. They have done a lot of experiments, and the paper is in. They have references to many other image based approaches, right? And you can check out the paper. I'll give the link of the paper in the description box here. And thank you so much for watching till the end. If you want to see this kind of content in the future, please subscribe to my channel. And if you like this video, please give a thumbs up. Thank you.